Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Kilayim. We're up to Perek Hey Mishnah Bet. The Mishnah now is going to teach us another condition that you have to meet for a collection of vines to be considered a vineyard. Kerem shu natua al pachot me'arba amot. If you have a vineyard planted in rows that are less than 4 amot apart from each other, Rabbi Shimon Omer eno kerem. Rabbi Shimon says it is not considered a vineyard. And the Mefarshim explained Rabbi Shimon's logic that even if the vines were planted in a way that would otherwise make them a vineyard, meaning 2 rows that one has 3 and one has 2, still they do not qualify if there is less than 4 amot of empty space between the rows. Why? Because the grower does not have the space that he needs to be able to plow with the ox between the rows or bring the wagon to harvest the fruit. Since the group of vines does not qualify as a vineyard, the vines are treated like individual vines, and you are allowed to plant until 6 tvachim away from them. V'chachamim omrim, but the sages say, kerem, it is considered a vineyard. V'roin et ha'emtzaiyot ki'ilu enan, and we view the middle rows, meaning the ones that cause the other rows to be less than 4 amot apart from each other, as though they were not there. And the Mefarshim give, if you look at the Art Scroll Elucidated for the diagram, they give an example. Let's say you have 5 rows of vines that are planted 3 amot apart from one another. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we look at 2 and 4 as if they were not there. So that 1, 3, and 5 are now 6 amot apart, and they combine to make a vineyard. Now, it's very common for people to overplant a vineyard and then uproot the weaker vines to use as firewood while they leave the stronger ones. So the fact that he planted too many vines in this space does not prove that he wants to keep all of them. Since in our case, the middle rows are preventing the other vines from being worked properly, we assume they are destined to be removed and used, and simply we're going to use them for the wood. Therefore, we can consider them even now as if they were simply wood and not fruit-bearing vines. That is in Rabotai of Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel now is going to speak about planting seeds inside a ditch in a vineyard. Charut shu over b'kerem. If there is a ditch that passes through a vineyard, amok asara v'archa b'arba'a, and it is 10 tvachim deep and 4 tvachim wide. We learned earlier in chapter 4, Mishnah 3, that a ditch that is 10 tvachim deep and 4 tvachim wide is considered a divider for the purpose of Kilayim. That would allow the person to plant a vineyard on one side of it and seeds on the other side of it. The Mishnah now is going to discuss the status of the ditch itself, not that you want to plant on the other side of the ditch, but in the ditch itself. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Im hayam mifulash merosh hakerem vat sofo, if it goes completely through the vineyard from one end of it to the other, then the inside of the dish we consider to be like an independent area between the 2 vineyards, and then we may plant seeds inside of it. And the Mefarshim explain, since the ditch runs through the entire vineyard and divides it, it doesn't look like a ditch part of a vineyard. And since the ditch is 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, it is legally considered an independent area. Therefore, seeds can even be planted inside of it. The imlav, but if it does not go completely through the vineyard, meaning the Mefarshim explained the ditch is really 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, but it doesn't go from one end of the vineyard to the other. Rather, it's surrounded by the vineyard on 3 sides. Harehu kigat. Then the ditch is considered like a wine press that a person digs in the middle of a vineyard where seeds cannot be planted, like the Mishnah is going to tell us right now. And the Mefarshim explain, if the ditch is not 10 tefachim deep or 4 tefachim wide, it doesn't divide the vineyard, and it also lacks the measurements to be considered a place in its own right. If it is 10 deep and 4 wide, it has the measurements to be considered a place in its own right under the Olaita law. However, since it doesn't cut through the entire vineyard, it doesn't look like a separate area that is independent of the vineyard. It looks like a place inside the vineyard. So midrabanan, the Chachamim considered it like a wine press in a vineyard. Like the Mishnah is going to explain right now, that the Chachamim, the sages, prohibited planting seeds in a wine press in a vineyard, according to the view that we're going to accept. The Mishnah says right now, Hagat shebakerem, a wine press that you dig inside a vineyard, amuka asara uchava arba'a, which is 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, There's a machloket. Rabbi Eliezer omer zorim betocha. Rabbi Eliezer says you can plant seeds inside of it since it's 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide. Now, the wine press was a pit in the ground whose walls you covered with plaster to seal it. Grapes were pressed in it and the juice was collected in the pit. Since the pit is 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, it is big enough to be considered a separate place and you can plant seeds inside of it. V'chachamim osrim, but the sages say you cannot plant anything inside of it. Even though midoraita, the wine press walls serve as a separation because it's 10 deep and 4 wide, the Chachamim nevertheless said you cannot plant seeds in the wine press because the airspace of the vineyard surrounds it, and the fact that it's submerged within the airspace of the vineyard, it looks like it's part of the vineyard that the vines are growing in, and therefore we view it as a separate place. We view it as a part of the vineyard and not a separate place on its own. Basically, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov who said that you cannot plant seeds in a ditch that does not go completely, who ruled that you cannot plant seeds in a ditch that doesn't go completely through the vineyard, he follows the view of the Chachamim regarding a wine press. He considers a ditch that is surrounded on 3 sides by the vineyard to be the same as the wine press in a vineyard, and like the accepted view, we said the Chachamim that you would not be allowed to plant in that case. However, when the ditch does cut through the vineyard from one end to the other, it is not considered completely within the airspace of the vineyard, since the vineyard itself has been divided into 2. The Mishnah now teaches another law for a separate place inside a vineyard. Shomera shebakerim, if there is a watchman's mound in a vineyard, the Mefarshim explain it's a small hill on which the shomer, the watchman, can stand and look over the top of the vines to watch the vineyard. If it's 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, zo'in betocha, you can plant seeds in it, meaning on top of the mound, because since it's 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, the top of the mound is considered a separate area. Again, if it's 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, zo'in betocha, you can plant seeds in it, meaning on top of the mound. V'im hayas se'al kotesh, but if there were vine branches from both sides of the mound that intertwined, meaning they became entangled over the top of the mound, asur, then it is asur to plant on the mound because it's not considered to be a separate place from the vineyard. And the Mefarshim explain, basically in the previous discussion, even though the Chachamim said on top that you cannot plant in a wine press of these dimensions, which is deep 10 and wide 4, they agreed that this mound, if it's high 10 and wide 4, is different. Why? Because unlike a wine press, the top of the mound is not surrounded by the airspace of the vineyard because of the height. Therefore, we can consider even midrabanan a area of its own, a place of its own. However, like we said, if the vine branches from both sides become entangled over the top of the mound, it literally means kotesh, banging hair. Now the shoots and the branches on top of the vines resemble hair. So the Mishnah says when they grow together and they intertwine on top of the mound, it looks like a mortar and pestle, mikatesh or machtesh, right? A mortar and a pestle. Right, the Mishnah says asur, then you would not be allowed to plant on the mound because it's not considered a separate place, because the overhanging branches, they nullify the mechitza, the divider that was made by the sides of the mound. Therefore, the top of the mound is not considered separate anymore. It is considered part of the surrounding vineyard. That is the end of today's Mishnah. Baruch Adonai La'olam, Amen v'Amen.